The Mojave Wasteland has a lot to discover, a huge host of powerful pre-war remnants scattered about the place, as well as plenty that was modified afterwards. And whilst many of the best rewards are granted for completing quests and side quests, you'd be surprised at how much stuff is just laying about in obscure locations. So, in this video, we'll be tracking down 25 hidden free gifts that we can pick up around the Mojave and beyond. There should be something decent for everyone here, so let's dive straight in. First up, a unique pistol that we can obtain for free over in Prim. Heading into the Bison Steve Hotel, straight ahead past the barricade and then left into this gift shop area, there'll be a safe in the floor behind the counter. It might be a case of coming back for this later, depending on your lockpicking skill, or you could try to boost it with locksmith magazines and chems. Regardless, make sure to return here once you can pick a hard level lock, as inside the safe will be the unique, awesomely engraved revolver called Lucky. Better in every way than your standard revolver, with higher damage, fire rate, a boosted crit chance, and lower AP to use in VATS. Plus, I mean, you just look like a badass holding it, especially kitted out in some of the best Ranger armor in the game, which we'll get to finding later. Next up, the Lucky 38 casino floor may not have games actually available to play like the others, but it does have a whole room left of when we enter, full to the brim with a bunch of cool loot. The best prize of all here though can be found behind the bar in the VIP lounge up above. At the top of a shelf sits a Boxing Times magazine and the unique golden boxing gloves. Now, looking at the stats of these, they don't do much damage at all, but that's not really the point of them. Whilst absolutely terrible at killing, the golden gloves excel at knocking foes unconscious. Perfect for incapacitating hostiles that you don't want to kill for whatever reason, or against singular, more powerful foes, it can be effective to knock them out first before finishing them off with a more powerful weapon. They pair especially aesthetically well with the Pimp-Boy 3 billion upgrades, but that's an item slightly more complicated to get, which I've broken down in more detail in my top 10 worst decisions in Fallout New Vegas video. Now, we'll want to head to the irradiated town of Camp Searchlight through the cellar door marked NCR Storage Room. Speak to Logan to begin the quest Wheel of Fortune, which will eventually grant us access to some of the locked buildings in the town. The last one being Searchlight Fire Station. Defeating the Rad Scorpion Queen before heading to the upstairs area, the second left will bring us into a bathroom. Then, opening up the second stall, tucked away in the back will be a unique fire axe called Knock Knock. Just like the pistol Lucky, this weapon boasts increased damage and faster attacks than its basic counterparts, as well as additional crit damage. The best thing about it though is its brutal, unique attack Mauler, where you basically swing the axe in an arc and have a high chance to knock down an enemy. You can either use this in VATS or by executing a power attack whilst moving forwards. Though personally I like to use this one in third person since the melee attacks look awesome, and there's just something fun about violently rampaging through fiends wielding an axe. A little south of Vegas into the Recon headquarters now, and the ease of getting this item will depend partly on your lockpicking or science skills. Through the main entrance, taking an immediate right, then left down the end of the corridor, will be a very hard locked door, or very hard to hack terminal, either of which will get us inside. Failing that, we can instead go to the second floor and hack a terminal capable of printing a security keycard, or else we can pick a hard locked door on the second floor, which will allow us to drop down into the room we need. Again, try using magazines or chems if necessary, or failing all of that, you can just come back later. Inside the locked room will be the Q35 Matter Modulator, a modified plasma rifle that consumes half the ammo, fires twice as quickly, and deals additional critical damage, all at the expense of some base damage. Though it is also slightly cheaper to use in VATS, and unquestionably the superior weapon for scoring crits. And personally, I think turning foes into green goo is a cooler effect than the Ashen one of laser rifles. And this was undoubtedly one of my favourite weapons long into the base game. One of the absolute most despicable NPCs in New Vegas, worse even than those in Caesar's Legion, is a fiend named Cook. Known for things such as burning children alive and abusing several of the women we can meet in the game, delivering to Cook what he deserves is something you'll no doubt be led to do somehow at some point in your playthrough. And given that he's based on a pretty main road outside of New Vegas, odds are that you'll just stumble across him anyway. He's literally just outside the South Ruins West entrance. Also in the ruin ruin where we defeat him though, on some shelves facing east, make sure not to miss Cook's Fiend stew, along with the ingredients underneath that we'll be using to make it. Comprised of potato, beer, jalapenos, and Brahmin steak, cooking those up at a campfire will give us a food that can buff our strength by 3 for 2 minutes. Useful, especially when over-encumbered, and cooking up a few of these should be enough to carry us through a dungeon if we find ourselves with too much stuff. So I guess for all of Cook's abhorrent evils, he did have that name for a reason. If you have a build that revolves around landing consistent critical hits, a very underrated gun you'll want to pick up can be found a little southwest of Nellis Air Force Base. Now, if you haven't picked up the Wild Wasteland perk, then simply head into Field's shack here and look on a shelf to the back left corner. Otherwise, just outside the shack with Rex as your companion, we'll get a fun little reference to Lassie, where Rex will inform us that a kid has fallen down this well. Not quite as happily as Lassie though, the kid will now be a skeleton, leaving behind the Abilene Kid Ellie BB gun. An incredibly weak weapon, as you would expect a BB gun to be, with just 4 base damage, but then landing 70 critical damage. I tested this against a giant pack of Deathclaws, and the results were as expected. Most of the time, this weapon did barely any damage at all, but occasionally, in fact quite often with crits, it would steal massive chunks of health. Again, this could actually be very effective when paired with a build designed for landing consistent crit hits. BB guns can also fire 100 shots before reloading, basically nullifying the whole reloading issue entirely. Again, underrated with the right build, or else just a fun little Lassie reference. Heading northwest of Helios 1 towards the base of Black Mountain, you'll come to Blackrock Cave, a place that, like the radio station above, is inhabited by Nightkin. Not too tough to deal with compared to Black Mountain, though they will of course try and sneak attack you, but coming to the back of the cave, laying on the remains of a dead prospector, will be a unique zap glove called the Paladin Toaster, a specialized melee weapon, specifically with enhanced EMP damage for dealing with robots and enemies in power armor. Granted, there aren't too many power armored enemies in this game outside of the Brotherhood of Steel, but if you are choosing a route where they need to be eliminated and you're opposed to just blowing up the base's reactor, this is, shall we say, a poetic weapon with which to take them down. To the far northeast of the Mojave, a little ways past Ranger Station Bravo, is a sinkhole called the Devil's Throat, overrun with centaurs and filled with radioactive barrels. Braving through all of that though, to head inside the truck at the center, laying on the floor at the back will be a dead prospector wearing a lootable party hat. A cool enough find in and of itself, but you may be a little more interested in the giant unique minigun called the CZ57 Avenger, a weapon with a ridiculously high fire rate, which is incredibly fun to use. That is, until you run out of ammo, which is going to be the main issue with using it. Plus, it understandably weighs a fair bit. But if you don't mind spending a lot of time in ammo crafting menus, maybe bringing Veronica or Edie as a companion, that can certainly make the gun stretch a little further, and it's definitely worth venturing out here to pick up. Remember the group of Great Khans that were with Benny when we got shot at the start of the game? Well, originally there was actually one more among their ranks. All Roads was a graphic novel released with the collector's edition of Fallout New Vegas and recounts the tale of Benny's journey to intercept and kill the courier. In it, we meet a Great Khan and Bitter Springs survivor named Chance, whose PTSD has understandably left him with a few screws loose. On the way to Good Springs, this group comes across a tribal camp being raided by fiends, and Chance, not willing to see another group slaughtered, leaps in and takes them all down with a knife. The fiends were ultimately defeated, but Chance was also seriously wounded. That same night, Benny left some psycho by Chance's side, giving him the choice to either straighten up or bow out, and unable to kick his chem addiction, Chance took it and was dead by the morning. His friends then buried him up the hill from the tribal village before all continuing on to Good Springs. Now, back in the game, we can actually find said tribal village a little north of Good Springs, along with all of the dead fiends that Chance slaughtered with his knife. But just up the hill on the left before reaching that, however, bringing a shovel with us, we can also dig up Chance's grave, taking for ourselves his knife with a higher overall damage than the regular variants. Also, if we head a ways further north from here, we can also find Chance's map of the Mojave, carved into the ground with this same knife earlier on in the graphic novel. When heading up the road to Jacobstown, there'll be a couple of mines we can explore along the way. The first of these, Ruby Hill Mine, will be infested with lake lurks thanks to the flooded section towards the back. Fighting our way through them to reach the platform descending into the water, there'll be a dead Jackal gang member holding a unique Displacer glove named Pushy. Again, like many of these uniques, it's basically a more powerful variant of the basic Displacer glove and well worth picking up for anybody using an unarmed build. What with its ability to push targets backward via a concentrated sonic blast. In fact, it's kind of ironic that we can find it amidst a lair of lake lurks, given they also emit a similar kind of attack. During the quest Come Fly With Me, where we help the Bright followers fulfill their dream of flying rockets to some new paradise, whilst we, a mere human, can't accompany them on their journey, we can still keep something rather spacey. In the basement, overlooking where the rockets are stored, on a shelf to the left when we enter the doorway, will be both a spare spacesuit and space helmet. The armor rating is okay for early game, and it does provide some radiation resistance. No doubt it would be useful if we actually went to space, but mostly it's just a cool, unique cosmetic. It is also technically possible to get multiple suits in one playthrough, so we can turn our companions into some sort of space squad, but that does mean we'll have to take the rest off the bodies of the Bright followers, if you catch my drift. Heading to a south-central point of the map now, crashed into the ground will be a vertibird. You'll also want to bring Arcade Gannon for this particular trip, as he'll let slip a little something about his past once we reach it.
A vertibird. Interesting. It's been a long time since I've seen one of these.
When was that?
Huh. Good question. Must have been in a book.
Clearly not what you meant, but okay. Looking at the aircraft, it clearly comes from the Enclave, explaining why on the ground is the insanely powerful Tesla Beaton prototype Tesla cannon. Awesome to use in all its electrical explosiveness, but also pretty high maintenance, needing 100 in energy weapons to properly use, requiring constant repair and blitzing through electron charge packs. Still, if you can deal with all of that, it can be a very fun weapon when dealing with large enemy groups. There are so many reasons to pick the Wild Wasteland trait in New Vegas, most of it relating to Easter eggs and random encounters, but also for the fact that it's the only way, in this game at least, to get an alien blaster. At the far north of the map, closest to the Horowitz farmstead, head northeast until you start traveling up a small ridge. There should be a Zayton spacecraft perched just outside the accessible area, and below it, 3 aliens. If you don't have Wild Wasteland, then it's still worth coming here anyway. You'll instead fight some raiders and get the unique Gauss rifle YCS-186. Another very powerful weapon, but significantly less unique than the gun of an alien race. Now, I did test whether you can get both by removing the Wild Wasteland perk at Big Empty, then returning to the same area, but the alien bodies were then still there and no additional mercenaries spawns. If you haven't been here at all yet, then you can reset your traits to get whichever weapon you'd prefer, though that will also be a permanent trait change for the rest of the playthrough. A decent early game holdout melee weapon for those with a sneak skill over 50 can be found on our initial journey around the Mojave. After heading out of Nipton and taking the road heading northeast, it'll soon curl around an abandoned settlement called Wolfhorn Ranch. Now, this place was originally supposed to serve as the home of Ulysses. During development, Ulysses was originally designed as a Legion-affiliated companion, but wound up being cut from the base game due to all his dialogue not actually fitting on the disc. Yep, remember 16 years ago when disk space was an issue? Thankfully, he was redeveloped for Lonesome Road, and I think his voice alone makes him one of the coolest characters in the game, arguably more so though in a villain-type role. Anyway, this left Wolfhorn Ranch almost entirely empty, but do still go inside the main building, and on the stove to the right will be a fairly inconspicuous cleaver called Chopper, easily repaired with any other cleavers we find laying around, and good to have if you get into a scrap at one of the casinos on the strip. Have you ever wanted to terrorize the wasteland with nothing but a simple, one might say humble, lead pipe? Well, in that case, you'll want to head to the Camp McCarran entrance and head through the grate on the floor leading down into the central sewers. From here, you'll first want to come out and take the tunnels north through this flooded section. Then, as you head up the hill, there'll be an illuminated doorway on your left, inside which is a guy called Blind Luke who has a key we're going to need. Coming out of here, you'll then want to head back southwards, heading for this area over here on the local map. That's the entrance we came in from. Now we just want to get to these rooms to the west of there, to a little region guarded by fiends and again illuminated with red lights. Head inside, then up the stairs, and using the key we just found, we can enter the sealed sewers. Inside is a dead prospector with a fair amount of loot, including a unique lead pipe called the Humble Cudgel. Again, like many of these uniques, slightly more damaging and more durable, as well as having a special power attack that could be used when moving forward. One of the game's coolest looking armor sets, and an awesome throwback to Operation Anchorage, can be found in a very obscure room on the Hoover Dam office level. Heading downstairs and taking a right, then a left, walking past the office of Colonel Cassandra Moore, whom we'll visit for the NCR questline, keep going around the corner from her office in an easterly direction, and the first door on your right will be a small office with a terminal. On here, we can read accounts of when the NCR first took stock of Hoover Dam, finding some odd pre-war looking exosuits. But before they had a chance to fully study them, however, someone reorganized the storage and the suits vanished. And no, that wasn't a ploy to steal them. Someone literally tidied them up and then no one could find them. Yet another example of NCR incompetence. Go check out my Endings Ranked Worst to Best video if you want to hear several more. But actually, the suits are still very nearby. Just head out of this office to the left, right around the corner to the end of the corridor, then right again, and there'll be a door with a radioactive symbol. Head inside to find some wooden crates, in which are 2 sets of Chinese stealth armor. A light armor that also boosts our sneak skill by 5, and should canonically have an invisibility field. Quite why these two don't in fact isn't entirely clear, along with the very fact that these suits are even at Hoover Dam in the first place. But even still, they look very cool to wear and are worth picking up for that reason alone. In fact, in Old World Blues at Big Mountain, we can even see that these Chinese stealth suits were what inspired the development of the Stealth Suit Mark II. A nice easy one now, at least if you're still friendly with the Legion. Go to Cottonwood Cove and head to the upper level of the HQ to the office of Aurelius of Phoenix. For me, it was nighttime when I did this and he was outside keeping watch, which definitely made this easier. Heading inside and looking in Aurelius's desk, we can steal the brilliantly named Recompense of the Fallen unique dog tag fist. Basically just 3 dog tags wrapped into each hand, making for an almost Wolverine-esque weapon. Presumably these are NCR dog tags as well, so I'd imagine Aurelius was just keeping these loose in his desk as trophies, and we decided to wrap them in this way and use them as a weapon to fulfill their namesake. After all, if the Legion are using these as a weapon to kill more NCR soldiers, then that isn't exactly recompense for the NCR soldiers that these dog tags belonged to. Sticking around this general area, further to the northwest is a place called Brock Flower Cave. We may have to come here to find Lady Jane's caravan as part of the quest Debt Collector, but she is easily enough convinced to pay her debt with decent speech or barter or the Lady Killer perk. Even still, you'll want to head to this cave regardless, and not just for the wreckage of her caravan. Once getting inside, continue taking every turn to the right, and eventually you'll come to this caged off area, inside which is a radiation suit, some chems, and most importantly, the unique varmint rifle called Ratslayer, an excellent sniper especially for the earlier game. A little weak on damage for later on perhaps, but it does continue to serve as a very accurate and easy to use sniper rifle. Again, more damaging than the standard varmint rifle, with a significantly improved critical multiplier. If you are wanting something that packs a little more punch than that sniper though, then travel back towards Cottonwood Cove to the top of a hillside overlooking it called the Sniper's Nest, a tiny outpost used by the NCR no doubt to spy on Legion activity in the area. The main problem you're going to have with getting this one is the very hard to pick gun case that it's sealed in, so certainly a later game weapon, but as I've said before in this video, keeping some locksmith magazines handy can be a great help with this. The Gobi campaign scout rifle comes with a desert camo themed paint job, packing vastly more punch than that last sniper we looked at, but also requiring a higher gun skill to use properly. There's no option to silence it either, so stealth is kind of out, but it does still make for an excellent weapon from a bit of a distance in open combat. Whilst we're still in this area, come to the southwestern side of Camp Searchlight to a place called Matthew's Animal Husbandry Farm if you want to hear a tragic tale. On the fateful day that Camp Searchlight would be turned into a radioactive death trap, 2 parents headed there to trade for supplies, remaining away unexpectedly long. And when their child, presumably called Matthew, went looking for them, he found the intense radiation that had suddenly fallen on Searchlight had transformed them both into feral ghouls, leaving him only with choices to either be eaten eaten or to put them down, carrying their transformed bodies home and burying them outside the house. Matthew, now alone, began to succumb to paranoia, or maybe secondary radiation sickness, eventually becoming convinced that the animals, like his parents, now intended to eat him. But rather than risking trying to take them all down, he instead decided to deny them a meal by burning down the farmhouse whilst he was still inside of it. Clearly, the man had gone insane, leaving behind just a farm now full of malnourished Brahmin and bighorners. An awesome piece of world building, showing the wider effects of what the Legion did to Camp Searchlight, and that story is really the main reason to come here. Though, there is also a Sunset Sarsaparilla Star bottle cap up in the back of one of the barns, and in fact, most of the smaller marked locations have one of these, so wandering to each of them that crop up on the map is a great way to complete that quest. For these final 5, let's venture a little beyond the Mojave, starting with the Honest Hearts region of Zion. The survivalist, a man named Randall Clark, who survived the end of the world in 2077, made this place his home for over 4 decades, and he scavenged a lot of awesome gear in that time to get by. One of these items can be found in the same canyon as the Dead Horses camp inside Fallen Rock Cave, the place Randall was first held up during the initial nuclear fallout. On the floor here, we can find his unique ranged taser weapon called the Compliance Regulator. Working almost like a ranged variant of the golden boxer gloves, this thing deals a very low damage, but on landing a crit hit will paralyze the target for 10 seconds. So essentially a taser, potentially useful against singular tougher bosses if you have a decently high critical hit chance. Extending the long arm of the law out in these parts, though, is also going to require the appropriate uniform to go with it. For this, you'll want to come north to the Sorrows camp and head into Stonebones Cave, where Randall would make his home 19 years later, and where he'd leave behind the Desert Ranger combat armor and helmet. I know that any Ranger armor can technically pull off that classic courier look that we all imagine when we think of this Fallout protagonist, but the Desert Ranger is not only one of the most highly defensive sets, it's also got the most character and history behind it, belonging first to a Marine named R.B. Vickers, before somehow winding up in Clark's hands, and finally, over 200 years later, being brought back to the Mojave by one of the most influential figures of the time. This exact set is, in my headcanon, the courier armor, and an item I will never fail to pick up in the back of this cave every time I visit Zion. But now for one of the most powerful weapons in the game. Big Mountain boasts some of the most advanced scientific and technological marvels ever seen in the Fallout universe, one of which is the Laser-Assisted Electrical Rifle, or LAER, a fast-firing, incredibly accurate energy rifle capable of mincing through many of the late-game enemies. But there is one particular model slightly more powerful still. Coming to the Chinese prisoner camp of Little Yangtze to the northwest and climbing up to the eastern watchtower, laying on a wall outside will be Elijah's advanced LAER, a model tweaked by Father Elijah before he traveled on to become the antagonist of Dead Money. He rigged the rifle to fire even faster than usual, slightly worsening the weapon durability, but provided you have plenty of weapon repair kits, or ED back in the Mojave, it can again carve through pretty much anything that comes at you. At the opposite end of Big Empty lies the Y-17 medical facility, a place where another Dead Money character, Christine, less fortunately wound up in. Straight through the doors, down in the middle of the floor, now buried slightly in rubble, is the auto-dock where Christine was first held captive. Cut open and experimented on who knows how many times, leaving all the facial scarring she has when we meet her in Dead Money. Left behind in this place, however, is Christine's Circle of Steel Recon armor, the set that would kind of go on to become the design of the Under Armor that Power Armor is suited over, but in this case it shares similarities to the Chinese stealth armor that we found back in Hoover Dam, namely the same +5 boost to sneak and an increased damage threshold at the expense of being classed as medium armor, not light. Rounding things off are a number of high-level, late-game rewards that will depend on how you chose to conclude Lonesome Road. Ironically, the best choice for the ending of that DLC in terms of getting gear is to nuke both the NCR and the Legion, unlocking both heavily irradiated areas of the Long 15 and Dry Wells. In the Dry Wells area, defeating the Legion Centurion Gaius Magnus, we can loot his awesome armor of the 87th Tribe, boasting the same damage threshold as T-45 power armor. Also, in a burnt-out tent is the Red Victory grenade rifle, the highest DPS grenade rifle in the game. Over at the Long 15 will yield similar but NCR-themed rewards. The Scorched Sierra power armor is probably the closest thing to that awesome NCR set from the TV show, granted purely by color scheme alone, and the Great Bear grenade rifle has the highest base damage of any of its kinds. All stuff that makes it very tempting to choose the chaotic evil ending of this DLC. But if you can't bring yourself to do that, or are just wanting to stay on friendly terms with all factions for as long as possible, you can at least return to the Divide and travel to the additional high-level area of the Courier's Mile, where, on a lamppost as we first enter, will be our final item of this video, the unique, brilliant stealth knife, Bloodnap. Now, hopefully you found this video useful. I feel like Fallout games always leave more to be talked about, even after 16 years in this case, so do comment below any other cool finds you've made across the Mojave, as well as what your favourite gear is to use in-game. Massive thank you, as always, to the patrons and channel members for supporting me in making more content like this. Cheers for watching, I'm Sam Bram, and I'll see you in the next one.